Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation today, you can type them into the Q&A located on the bottom toolbar of the Zoom screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and for those registered for Crop Talk, will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. I'd like to welcome everybody to another season of Crop Talk. It's a little change in weather from the last week. We've got lots of rain and snow and fog and everything going on, and I think we were getting some producers that were getting really close to being in the field, and I actually did hear reports of some guys being in the field already. So it's the season is here, and I thought it would be good to start off the season kind of like we've done in the past, where we get a weather update and a look at some of the things that might be to come for this coming year. And we have Alison Sass on, and she's going to be giving a presentation regarding that. From there, we're going to go into our crop scouting panel, and we've got a couple questions and an introduction of our new oilseed specialist. So with that, I will turn it over to Alison, and let's get started with our weather update.
Great, thanks, Lionel. Just bear with me here. Okay, everything look good?
Yes, it does.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us today for our first crop talk of 2024, I believe. So I'm Alison Sass. I'm the meteorology specialist with Manitoba Agriculture, and I help to run the operations and a lot of the data analysis for our professional grade weather network. And today I'll just be giving a little summary on what we saw last season going into the fall, some of the conditions we've seen over the winter, and a bit of a spring outlook. So to summarize what we saw last growing season, for those who might have forgotten, it's hard to forget, however, there was a couple of themes around the year. It was hot, especially at the beginning of the season. It was dry in lots of regions, but it was also pretty wet in other regions. Some areas were just kind of dry. Some areas were a little bit too wet. Some were wet enough, but when you considered the heat, then it got a little complicated. And some were dry enough, but then they had rain at the right time, but then it dried out later on. And really, to summarize, it was just variable. So we had a lot of variation in precipitation last growing season. Some producers lucked out and got just the right amount of rain at just the right time. Some saw those warm days early in the season help things along, but really it was a really tough season to summarize as a whole province. Things varied from region to region, town to town, and even field to field. So looking at the whole season's worth of precipitation between May and October last year, compared to the 30-year average, most of the province remained below normal by the end of October. In the east, Interlakes and part of the central region saw precipitation percentages of normal increased slightly between September and October. We had a bit of rain during that time, but many areas were still below 100% compared to the normal. And as of October 29th, the only area that was near or above normal was in the Interlake around Fisher Branch, Fisherton area. I want to note that this is a season-long perspective. So something that we definitely saw as challenging last year is these maps don't take into account the timing, the intensity, or the duration of the precipitation. And what we saw last season was a lot of the precipitation came in the form of isolated storms. And that's what really led to the variability across the province. As I mentioned in our first summary slide, we had a really hot start to the growing season, and that saw heat units well above the 30-year average for much of the growing season. By the end of October, both the growing degree days and core heat units were approaching normal values by the end of October, but most of Agro-Manitoba was still above normal. Moving into the fall, so we did get some precipitation in September. And then what we do is we create these fall soil moisture maps annually. So soil moisture does not change significantly during the winter because the ground is frozen. So we can use the fall soil moisture right before freeze up as an indication of what we can expect the soil moisture conditions to be in the spring at the time of thawing. So looking at these two maps, you can see that the soil moisture at both the surface, or the 0 to 30 centimeter, and the rooting zone, the 0 to 120 centimeter depths, are showing adequate soil moisture in most regions in November. So that was just before freezing up. The soil moisture at the lower depths is a little more variable. There's some regions, localized regions, that are lower than 60% per se, but the surface levels are looking promising. And again, there are some local regions indicating other things. I want to mention too that while we're looking at these maps, while I'm mentioning the local variation, is these are made from the data from our weather station locations, and it's basically to provide a regional estimation. So we want to look at it at a regional basis, and conditions will vary depending on your location, your soil properties, topography, etc. And soil conditions can vary a lot over even a short distance. So what we can see again is much of the east, the southwest, and the central regions are displaying soil moisture at the 0 to 120 centimeter depth of about 60 to 100% of the potential water holding capacity of the given soils in those areas. So that was kind of a promising look going into the fall, even after that dry summer that we had in many regions. So what we've seen over the winter, so our current conditions, this is showing our total accumulated precipitation and the percent normal precipitation since November 1st. So we look at our averages over the entire growing season or the off season, which is November 1st to May 1st. So you can see that the southwest and central regions are below 50% of the 30-year average for that time period, whereas the northwest, interlake, and eastern regions are closer to normal, with some areas even above the 30-year average. But this only goes to April 14th. And most of us have noticed that we've had some precipitation over the last couple of days. So I was able to create a few new maps. These are hot off the press this morning to help gather some of that information up until midnight of last night. So midnight of April 16th. And what we can see is even over a couple of days, our conditions have changed quite drastically, or significantly, I should say. When we compare to the 30-year average, we can see that the western region around Hamiota and Shiloh are now approaching normal. Conditions have also improved in the southwest and central regions. However, that being said, there are regions, especially surrounding Riding Mountain National Park, that have accumulated way more than the normal precipitation, which might be kind of undesirable at this time. So we don't have any crop demand for that water at this time. I know that some regions were also struggling with some overland flooding because the ground was still frozen last week while we were getting some of that runoff. So while conditions might have improved in some areas, we have to be knowledgeable that it can be challenging in other areas where they've seen a little bit more precipitation. I also want to note that even though there's still a lot of dark brown in that central region, that means things are below 50% of the 30-year average. When I compared it to what we were seeing last week, so first week of April, there has been an improvement. So the majority of stations in the central region are now showing above 40% of the 30-year average, whereas in previous weeks we were seeing stations with like 20% of the average, or under 30%. So it is still well below average, but to look on the bright side, things are improving, especially with this rainfall. And rain is also anticipated, precipitation, I should say, because we're getting some snow as well, within the next few days up until Friday, and then later on in the week as well. Next week, I think we might see some precipitation across the province as well. So I've been getting a lot of questions this winter about, are we going to see a drought? It was so dry last season. Are we going to get a year that looks like 2021? Is it going to be a drought? When are we going to start seeing the drought, etc.? So I thought I'd touch base on a couple of those concerns. This is the Canadian Drought Monitor that's put together as part of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And this is derived from many meteorological, hydrological, live data, modeled inputs. All kinds of inputs and expertise go into these predictions and these observed conditions. So this was published at the end of March, so before we've had any of this recent precipitation. There was an improvement since the February drought outlook as well. So to the end of March, the Canadian Drought Monitor is showing severe to extreme drought in the central and southwest agricultural regions of Manitoba, which is can be thought of as about a 1 in 20-year drought conditions. Severe drought is seen in the Portage la Prairie area and the area from Morne and Winkler to Emerson. This has changed to a classification of moderate drought. So, let me repeat that. So we're seeing, as of March 31st, a moderate drought classification for the region from Portage la Prairie area and into the area of Morden and Winkler. And this was an improvement over their February conditions, which were forecasting a severe drought. However, again, I want to emphasize that this was created at the end of March and has not taken any precipitation into account that we've seen since then. On this map as well, we're seeing the Northwest, East, and Interlake regions are showing an abnormally or moderate drought. So that classification can be interpreted as abnormally dry would be a 1 in 3-year event, whereas the moderate drought would be a 1 in 5-year event. The Canadian Drought Monitor also has a drought outlook for the following month that they produce. So again, this is all modeled data and it's all dependent on information that they have up until March 31st. So when we compare the drought conditions as of March 31st on the left-hand side to the drought outlook for the end of April, we can see that they're forecasting a drought removal for much of Agro-Manitoba. So all of that area in green, it'd be that we'd remove that classification of drought. In that central area where you're seeing the yellow colors, that is indicating that they're predicting that the drought will improve, so possibly move up a classification or two. And then in that small area that's in the darker brown would be a no change in drought. Again, this is modeled information. It's not necessarily what's absolutely going to happen, and this isn't taking into account any of the information that we have from April yet, but it is kind of promising to see. I've linked the information to this drought outlook at the bottom of the slide as well. And I suggest that if you want to learn a little bit more about the drought or zoom into more of your area, the Canadian Drought Monitor is a really good resource to have. As for the spring forecast, when we're thinking about dry conditions, looking at the Environment and Climate Change Canada for the next 3 months, so that's April, May, and June, we're seeing a 50 to 70 chance, 50 to 70% chance of temperatures being higher than normal in most of Agro-Manitoba. Now, this doesn't mean that every day is going to be warmer than normal. It just means that on average, over the next 3 months, that those average temperatures are likely to be higher than normal. And it doesn't say how much above normal those temperatures are expected to be. Precipitation wise, it's undetermined at this time. So precipitation is extremely difficult to predict over such a long period of time. So we're seeing that there's about equal chance that precipitation might be higher than the 30-year average and a 50% chance that it might be lower. So, or it might even be around normal. So yeah, equal probabilities either way, kind of undetermined at this time. But one thing I want to highlight when we're considering the dry conditions and what really separates what we saw in 2023 going into 2024 to what we saw in 2021 is 2021 was the last year in several years of dry conditions. So it was preceded by several seasons that experienced near or below average seasonal precipitation and low soil moisture at freeze up. And this was exacerbated even more in 2021 because then we had those hot and dry conditions experienced through the growing season with those lessened moisture reserves in the soil, even at the deeper depths. So what we're seeing in 2023, the soil moisture at the 0 to 30 centimeter depth is about 80 to 100% of the percent of available water holding capacity. And when we compare this to the map on the left-hand side, that was the same map for the fall of 2020 going into 2021. So really, this is really highlighting the differences in that soil moisture that we saw going into the season. So we were really fortunate to have some of that soil moisture get replenished in the fall of 2023, to have that in the soil going into the growing season this year. So I don't think we are going to see the extremes, especially not right off the bat, that we saw in 2021. So just to kind of summarize the concerns about the dry conditions, the late fall precipitation in 2023, and we had a later than usual freeze up, so allowed the soil moisture in many areas to replenish prior to freezing. And the soil moisture was indicating adequate soil moisture for a lot of regions. Although winter precipitation was variable and lower than normal for many areas, especially the southwest and central regions, recent rains have been welcomed in many areas, including the southwest. Further precipitation would be beneficial to most areas, but especially, again, the southwest and central regions and parts of the east. But we are going to see precipitation in the next 10 days, hopefully. Currently, soil temperatures are indicating that thawing has occurred in most areas, and this will allow the precipitation that we are getting to infiltrate into the soil. We'll be assessing soil moisture in the next little while, so pretty soon. We just want to make sure that on a more provincial-wide basis that we are seeing that thawing before we made any soil moisture estimations. But really, conditions can change over a shorter period of time. At this point, all it takes is a large rain event or two to change conditions drastically. So we're going to keep watching the conditions and monitoring them and reporting them. You can follow along with the conditions throughout the growing season and the off season. All of the information that we provide is based on our weather program. So we have 120 professional grade weather stations across the agricultural regions of Manitoba. And we have a station combined with our network and the Environment and Climate Change Canada network about every 20 to 30 kilometers throughout the province. And each station measures temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, wind direction, pressure, precipitation, solar radiation, soil moisture, and soil temperature. And all those soil measurements are taken at the 5, 20, 50, and 100 centimeter depths. All of our data is published live on our current weather viewer and our current conditions and reports. So if you go to our current weather viewer, you'll see a map come up with a bunch of dots on it, and you can zoom in and out on that map. And then there's a variety of tabs on the top of that map where you can select which variable you want to view. And as you zoom in closer to the map, you can see those live conditions, the actual values at those stations, rather than having to click on each one. The map is updated hourly. And if you want further, more detailed information on a given station, clicking on any of those dots will bring up that view that you see on the right-hand side, the detailed view for that station. As of April 1st, those pages, the detailed pages, update every 15 minutes based on the information from our weather station. So that's where you can get all of the live information. I will caution you when you're looking at this during the off season, the soil moisture values are not valid when the soil is frozen. But as we're seeing, most of the soil has thawed out. The soil moisture, at least at the top depths, are indicating that the soil is thawed. We also produce regional reports that you can view through our website. And each week we produce the crop weather report. So we create all those maps that I referred to a lot throughout the presentation. And these are done weekly on Mondays. And we produce the crop weather report, which is more of a value-based table that we submit. So we release those with the crop report on Tuesdays, I believe. Mondays is when the actual weather part comes out. So you can either access them through our website on the weather conditions and reports page, or you can actually subscribe and have the crop weather reports emailed to you. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation, and I'd just like to extend my thanks to our whole AgMet team, including our manager, Colleen Flynn, our field technicians, Ian Petkow and Jared Knockhart, who are responsible for keeping all of our outdoor equipment running smoothly. And I'd like to thank Timmy Ojo, our ag modeling specialist that's helped a lot with developing this network, and our co-op student, Mark Lisak, who's done a lot of work on the back end data analysis for us. So if there's time for questions, I'd be happy to answer any.
Okay, yeah, Alison, good presentation, a lot of good information there. Question I get quite a few times throughout the year is, are you looking for any other weather stations currently?
It depends on the area. So we have pretty good coverage right now. But I do know that there are some gaps and some areas where we might be willing to expand. So the best thing to do in that case is to reach out to me or through our general agriculture email, and they'll triage your emails to me as well. And then we can kind of look at the area in question and see if we can find a suitable site. So there are some standards for our siting. We need an open area, it needs to be near agriculture land, needs to be accessible throughout the year, etc. So it's always something that we're open to. I can't guarantee that we'd put one wherever someone wants it. But it's definitely something that we're open to and can discuss further.
Okay, and this question just come in. Excuse me. Is there much difference between your weather stations and some of the ones that are being advertised or sold currently?
There are differences. Um, the thing to think about is what your needs are and what variables you're looking into the most. So I am aware that there's much more affordable weather stations out there that are easy to deploy, and you can deploy a lot of them over a short area. So those are great for getting really localized information. It's also great for building redundancy. So should one of those stations fail, there's another station close by. However, our stations are professional grade. So the instrumentation usually is more accurate. And we also committed to intensive maintenance and calibrations on our stations. So we visit every one of our 120 weather stations in the spring. So we should be starting maybe even as early as next week. We clean the stations, check them out, fix anything that needs to be fixed. And we do the same thing in the fall to prepare them for the winter. And then each summer we calibrate a third of our stations. So all of our stations are up to calibration standards. We also meet world meteorological standards with the height of our sensors, the locations of our sensors, and even the type of our sensors. And one final thing that makes our stations a little bit unique is that we have, so if you look in that picture, the first instrument that you see next to the white truck is our pluvio all-weather rain gauge. So that measures both winter precipitation and spring precipitation. So when precipitation falls into that bucket, it melts, and we can measure the water value of that precipitation. As far as I know, the smaller stations that I've had experience with anyways do not measure winter precipitation at all. They use a tipping bucket rain gauge. Some of them might be heated and measure that winter precipitation, but then you need it powered. So there might be some variation in that. And then the step up from there is Environment and Climate Change Canada stations, which are similar to ours, but they're almost even a step up as well. They have powered stations, whereas the majority of ours are solar powered. They have a little bit more intensive measurements. Some of them measure snowfall and snow depth. So it's really the best thing I can recommend is using all the information that you can get. So there's no such thing as too much weather information, especially in terms of localized information. If you want to know the wind speed at a given field, then by all means, a smaller weather station can provide that. However, the height of that weather is going to be relative to what you're seeing. So the height of a wind measurement taken at 3 meters versus 10 meters versus 6 feet is going to be all different. It's going to be all relative. So it really depends on your needs. And again, I find the best way is to use a multiple of different inputs in making your decision. So if you can get lots of weather data for your particular site, then by all means, use it.
Okay, another question just come in. Are we in a La Nina phase now? And historically, what does that mean in regional prairie growing conditions?
I can't speak too much on that. I haven't done too much research, but I have heard that we are likely going into a La Nina phase. And I would double check on this, but I believe that we might see a near normal to even below normal temperatures. And I'm not sure what we're expecting in terms of precipitation. I'd like to look at that up a little closer before I respond. But again, the thing to consider with both the La Nina and El Nino events is sometimes we don't see the effects as much as others. So it doesn't mean that if I say temperatures are going to be below normal, doesn't mean that it's going to be below normal every day for the whole season, for that whole term of El Nina, or sorry, La Nina. And it doesn't necessarily, like, they're so variable, and sometimes they just add to the unpredictability of what we're going to see. So I will check into that a little further and maybe report back to Lionel for our next crop talk, with an answer to that, just because I want to be sure, before I, hang my hat on my response.
Okay, that's great, Alison. We could get you back maybe next week in our panel and you could explain it or give your answer then, if that works
For
for you.
sure. For sure.
Good. Okay, well, that's the questions that I've received so far. And once again, thanks, Alison, for coming on today. A lot of good information. I really liked the information you gave regarding the drought, because I think it was on a lot of people's mind. And I think you maybe put a few people a little bit more at ease there with some of the information you were showing. So thanks again, Alison. And if I don't know if you're busy for the rest of the crop talk, but if you hang around, if there's any more questions, I could always ask you towards the end.
Sure. Yeah, I'll hang around. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to just continue on here. And so this year we're going to be having the crop scouting panel again. And previous years, we had our specialists that work out of Carmen that come on and answer questions throughout the growing season. And it's been a very popular. So they've all agreed to come on again this year. We're going to be adding a new member to the crop scouting panel, and that person is Sonia Wilson. And Sonia, if you are on, I think you prepared a slide to give an introduction for yourself. So if you would take it away right now.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. Should be
Yeah,
up
we can see.
now.
You bet.
Awesome. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm just doing a really brief intro here as I'm a new member joining the team. As Lionel said, my name is Sonia Wilson, and I'm joining as the oil seeds specialist. So looking forward to hopefully meeting a lot of you over this next season here. So I just wanted to give a really brief overview kind of what my 2024 looks like, and yeah, and then I'll have my contact information on the next slide. But just a little bit of background. So as the oilseed specialist, I'm really involved in the crops like canola, sunflower, flax, industrial hemp, etc. And a couple of things that are on my radar and in my role coming up this year are participating and presenting at Crop Diagnostic School, where I'm sure I'll see a lot of you there, supporting variety trials across the province, particularly for canola and flax, also being involved in the Manitoba Canola Disease Survey, and others, and then of course answering questions throughout the season from producers, industry, etc. So that's really brief, but I wanted to just share my I'll move over here. There, my contact info. So please, yeah, get in touch if you guys have any questions. And like I said, I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you over the season. So thanks so much.
Lionel, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thanks, Sonia. I just wanted to say that you'll be hopefully joining the crop scouting panel and be working with us throughout the season as we see the crop going in and running into any issues. We hope we can use your expertise to get a good canola crop off and going this year. So thanks, Sonia, for being on today.
Awesome. Thanks, Lionel.
Okay, so now actually got a couple questions. It's a little early, so we didn't get a lot of questions, but I got one question this week. And John Gavlowski, I think, is on. And the question is going to be to John regarding seed treatments for the control of cutworms. And the question the producer had was, how does he, or what should he consider when he is looking at buying a seed, and is there some fields different than other fields, or just what are some points he should consider before going to or adding that option onto seed treatment?
Yeah, so cutworms are a tricky one because we've got different species and they're really hard to predict where they're going to show up the next season. Now, one thing you can consider, obviously, is the history. If you've had a field where they seem to repeatedly be showing up, and that's one thing you could consider. When Now, I mentioned we do have different species of them. Most of the eggs for our pest cutworms get laid in August and early September. And when they're laying their eggs, they're usually looking for some shelter, and also if there's a nectar source when the adults are laying their eggs, they'll be drawn to that. So sometimes if you've had a weed patch in a field that was flowering, that can draw cutworms to an area. And I'll just give you an example. I was called out to a field one year where it had a very distinct patch that was heavily infested. The rest of the field was fairly clean. And the farmer had told me that that area was the thistle patch the previous season, which made sense because the thistles would have been what likely drew in the adults to that area of the field. So they can be patchy, but things can move around from year to year. As mentioned, we do have different species. Red-backed and dingy are probably the two common ones. But it isn't straightforward and easy to say if you had them bad in the field last year, they will be there next year. It doesn't always work that way with cutworms. So it is a bit trickier, especially when you're trying to make seed treatment decisions. So if you are looking to put something down for cutworms with your canola seed, you'll probably be looking at either Lumiderm or Fortenza. And both of them do work quite well on cutworms. And also you will get flea beetle control because there's a neonic mixed in, either a helix or a prosper as well. The same rule, though, applies for flea beetles. If you have a Lumiderm or a Fortenza, start scouting after about 3 weeks after your seeding date, and certainly after 4 weeks. Make sure you're scouting for the flea beetles. You will get a bit better protection from the striped flea beetle and a little bit extended control, but still that 3 to 4, count on 3. If you get 4, you're doing good. The weather, especially moisture, can influence how long the seed treatments work because they are water soluble. So certainly after 4 weeks, you do need to be scouting. In fact, start scouting after 3, and definitely after 4, you want to be checking for the flea beetle damage. Hopefully the cutworms, though, those products should do a pretty good job.
Okay, John, while I got you on, I also had a call yesterday from a producer, and we were just talking, and one of the things we were talking about, he's in an area that had some grasshopper issues last year, and he was wondering if the warm weather we had would be triggering some of the eggs to start hatching yet. And then he was hoping that this rain might do some damage to them. But any comments on how much warm weather we need before the eggs start to hatch? Or
So yeah, super question. So there's really 2 things there: temperature and moisture. So temperature wise, I am expecting an earlier hatch this year. Now, when I say earlier, you won't see our pest species in April or early May. Mid to late May, possibly this year. In I'll say a normal year, late May to early June is when we start seeing the hatch of the pest species. It might be a little bit earlier this year for two reasons. One, we had a very warm late summer. September was very mild, as was early October, which meant that for our pest species, they all overwinter as eggs, and you get a bit of embryological development in those eggs late in the summer if it's warm enough. So that would have happened. And once we're above about 10 degrees, you will start to get development within those eggs. And again, probably I would say if we have a milder spring, probably about mid to late May, but probably more closer to mid-May is when we could expect to see our pest species starting to hatch out. Anything prior to that is likely not a pest species. And for sure, if you see what look like larger grasshoppers now, there are a few non-pest grasshoppers that overwinter as partially grown nips. You could start seeing them, especially in the pastures. You could start seeing them almost any time, and they would look like they're already at least halfway developed. Those species we don't see a lot of. We don't really consider those pest species. So anything fairly large now and for the next, say, 3 or 4 weeks is probably not a pest species. The moisture thing, maybe I'll start with a bit of a story here. A colleague of mine, he took some grasshopper eggs from one of our pest species, put them in a glass of water, let it sit for a week, dumped out the water, the eggs hatched. So the moral of the story is grasshopper eggs are very resilient to excess moisture. They have this coating on them, on their chorion or their eggshell, that it's almost like the Gore-Tex material that they use in jackets. It will, it's semi-permeable. It will allow the egg to breathe, but it keeps the moisture out, or the excess water out. So yeah, even if your ditches are full of water for a few days, it won't kill the grasshopper eggs. So they're pretty resilient.
Okay, thanks, John. That's a good comment there. I think it's kind of what I had mentioned to him, but I just thought it would be maybe a good question to bring up on the Crop Talk today, just to, I guess, get it out to a few more people as well. So thanks for that. So one of the things we've been doing in the past with Crop Talk is we get questions in during the week or even during the presentation. So feel free to contact myself. I'll give you my email address at the end of the presentation here, and feel free to ask any questions throughout the week or during the Crop Talk presentations, because we've got the ability to use our specialists, and this is a good way to get out all that information. Another thing that's available right now and in timely fashion is our field crop production guide for 2024. So it's going to be available at all the ag service centers. So it's the big book, and if you're going to be doing any spraying, or if you're going to be have questions regarding any of the chemicals, it's definitely a book that you need to have. So stop by the offices and pick them up if you're having or if you need some assistance in finding the books. You could let us know and we'll get you in contact, or let you know where you can go pick them up and go from there. The other two books that I think are really handy to have right now are the Yield Manitoba. A lot of people have made a lot of their seeding decisions right now, but it's really good, the Yield Manitoba book, for comparing yields in your area as to what crops or what varieties might be doing better than others. And Seed Manitoba for just seeing all the new varieties that are out there as well. So 3 books that you should have in your half ton, in your water truck, on your air seeder, just so you could be looking up things as the day goes by. as we're going out throughout the season here, we do have the Manitoba hay listing service, and we are getting to the point where I think a lot of producers have whatever hay they need in place. But if you've got hay for sale, this service really works well. A lot of people look to it for buying hay and or selling hay. So if you have some left to move before the end of the year here, be a good time to get it listed. Also, the crop residue burning. If you're looking at doing some burning, it'd be a good idea to make sure you have. If you're in an area that requires permits, it'll be a good idea to make sure you get a permit before you start burning. Our crop extension specialists are located throughout the province. Their names and phone numbers are there. If you've got questions, again, as we get into seeding and the growing season, please feel free to contact any one of these people. If they don't have the answer for you right away, they definitely would do their best to find it for you. Our livestock people, again, we're getting into that time of year where we're going to be hopefully not too long from getting cattle out on pasture, maybe a month or so. So if you've got some grazing plans or you're looking at doing something with your pastures, good information from any one of these people. So definitely give them a call. Our service centers and where they're located. So the phone numbers, locations, there's the 1-800 number and the MASC 1-800 number. So if you need to get in contact with anybody there, young farmers, if you're looking to start farming and looking for crop insurance for the first time, there's a program, a young farmer program that gives you rebate back on your insurance costs, and so again, something to talk to crop insurance about when you're talking to them. And if you got questions and you would like us to address anything on Crop Talk, please feel free to contact myself or Lori. Give us let us know what you're thinking, what you want, what your questions are, and we'll do our best to address them. So I guess with that, that'll end Crop Talk for this week, and we'll see you next week, April the 24th. Hopefully we'll be done the rain and snow, and we might have some guys out in the field. I mentioned at the beginning that we had producers that were probably ready to go probably by the end of the week here, and with this rain event coming up, and most guys are held off, which is good, and now it's just a matter of getting things dried up and getting back out there, or getting out there. So thanks for attending, and see you next week.